Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. This is Thomas Paine, also known as Douglas Gabriel. I'm with Michael McKibben, our good friend. How are you, Michael?
Hi, Douglas. Great to talk to you after a long break.
Well, it's okay because I know when you go down that deep, you're coming up with something special. And as we gave you as the biggest task, it wasn't really a task. We were just sitting around wondering between us who are researching this, how does George Soros get caught in the Queen's Privy Council? Because we know that there's a battle now between Soros and the Queen and Brexit, and now that the Parliament over there has voted to again leave the European Union of Soros. That's what I like to call it, the European Union of Soros. And I know he had to have deep connections to the Privy Council. And you went down. I don't know. You must have gone scuba diving, because you came up with more gold. I mean, a treasure chest of gold, proving how George Soros is not only connected to the Queen's Privy Council and the manipulation of elections all around the world, including America, and through Jeffrey Patty, Sir Jeffrey Patty, who's also the Privy Council and on SCL, but also you have uncovered even more how it's shocking. It really is shocking. I'm sitting here reeling from the news that you've brought up, and now you and Betsy and Truth News Headlines and Americans for Innovation have released. So can you tell us what you've discovered?
Yeah, we've discovered that it appears that the Queen's Privy Council is the ultimate insider trading group on the planet. And that in addition to the SCL, Cambridge Analytica, mind-bending, brainwashing, PR advertising capabilities that they developed through Sir Jeffrey Patty, there's another Sir. His name is Sir Baron Lord George Mark Malloch-Brown. And that's a mouthful. But several of our researchers on the West Coast came up with this name, and when they discovered that he was associated with the electronic voting machines that are used in this particular state out west. And as it turns out, this electronic voting machine is used in 17 states in the United States. And upon digging further to find the associations with Sir Jeffrey Patty, we just had an explosion that caused a complete turn on the roundabout to go out into another whole area of this corruption, dealing with the actual voting machines that are being implemented not only in the United States, but I'm going to say about 15 or 20 other countries around the planet, from Colombia all the way to Estonia,
and let's
including
remember
the UK.
That his good friend Jeffrey Patty has intervened in 100 elections in 60 countries and basically is an election manipulation machine. And now you're saying that Lord Malloch is in charge of the voting machines in America? Is that
Yes,
what you're telling us?
not in 17 states, not all voting
states.
machines.
Probably very important states in terms of the Electoral College, I'm sure.
Yes, I need to look up the map, but the general. Let me look that map up.
One of
right
them
now.
was Utah, and
Let me read the state
perhaps
names of the
how
states.
unfit Mitt got elected. When you see that these machines, as we've seen with the Diebold machines, and you were in the middle of that with the whole election in Ohio, the presidential election.
Diebold has their headquarters in Akron, Ohio.
And you were right there with, working that case with, not with the lawyers, but there were hundreds of lawyers working on the fraud created by Diebold machines. Now, is it any wonder that we see fraud in 17 different states? There was fraud in the primaries in the Democratic National Committee. Now, wait a second. Let's see if that aligns with the very 17 states that Maddock and Lord Malloch controls from Britain, and he's on the Privy Council of the Queen. This is absurd.
Yes. Well, it's even deeper than that. But first, let me read you the names of the states where the Smartmatic machine is in use according to their own brochure published earlier this year. I'll start out on the West Coast. It's Washington State, Oregon, Nevada, California, Arizona, Colorado, Louisiana, Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Florida and New Jersey. And
Wow.
the District of Columbia. That's interesting.
Some of those states where the election rigging was so profound that in just first 7 states, I think most of them were just mentioned, that they looked into, it was between 3.5 and 5.5 million fake votes. They don't know where they came from, but all they did was do a simple cross-reference with the license and the Department of Motor Vehicles in the state, and they found this in just the first, month of Vice President Pence's examination into the corruption of elections. So what you have triggered here, I also know, came from your deep research, which is now moving forward beautifully, on demanding there be bipartisan chain of custody concerning all voting, and that all the votes. And this is another thing I want you to address so people can understand there is a way out of this.
Yes, very simple. It's called paper ballots. And chain of custody, bipartisan chain of custody to count the ballots. And the bipartisan chain of custody to carry those votes to the state to be logged onto the state system. The problem we've had, any software person worth their salt will tell you that there is no way that you can ensure a bipartisan chain of custody by relying only on electronic voting machines. Impossible. There's too many bits of electrons flying around on chips that can be intercepted, and software can act on those bits, and they can change numbers inside these devices. There are so many ways to do it, and we now know many of them. One of them is called fraction magic with the Diebold machines. And with the Smartmatic machine, I haven't spent as much time studying that, but it's the same thing. And the idea is actually very simple, and we call it Back to the Future. We go back to paper ballots and bipartisan groups counting those ballots, and those same bipartisan groups getting in a car and driving those records to the state and watching them be entered into the state system. And then in addition to that, have the boards of election in each county actually photograph their tally cards and put them on the internet so that everyone can see the results.
You know, I think
there you'll stop that. You'll stop this fraud in its tracks.
And I like the other thing I've heard you mention, which is ink your finger, so you can't vote twice.
Yeah, they do that in many parts of the world.
And why can't we do that? Because we are rushing to get the decision the day of the vote, because we think centralizing things through digitizing it makes it better. It makes it more vulnerable. That's what it really makes it. And the man in the middle, you have gone after. You've told us and given us, through other people that you've worked with, ways to protect this in an election. Maybe you could say something about that too, because
there are at least 2, actually more than that. But besides, we won't deal with the whole issue of busing people around and having them vote multiple times. But if we just deal with the voting machines themselves and then the reporting, one of the reasons the control of the voting machines is important is in order for man-in-the-middle fraud to work, the votes need to be close between the two parties. And so it appears that they use these voting machine capabilities and backdoors to keep the vote close. So if you're 51-49 and you flip the vote the other way around, most people won't notice. And especially if you don't have any sort of ability to check it against a paper ballot, then you get away with it. But if the vote is enormously in the favor of one candidate over the other, like it appears to have been with President Trump, you can't change the number. It'll be obvious to everyone. And what we've seen is that the exit polls coming out of these contested states pretty much proves if it's over 2%, there's fraud involved, and that has occurred in all these states where the vote was contested. So you've got the voting machines themselves making it a clean vote, bipartisan counting. So everybody involved in the parties that are involved in the election count together, and then they come up with a number. They put that number on a tally card and photograph that and put it on the internet. And then it's very difficult to change. Not impossible, but and then you report that up the line. The other way of doing it could be to take the electronic result from that tally card and report it electronically to the state. But what has been happening in past elections is something called man in the middle, where the vote signal is sent to a third party, oftentimes not even in the same state, where the numbers are adjusted to the candidate that third party man in the middle wants to win, and then the adjusted number is sent back and sent on to the state. That can be actually detected fairly easily by just having some bipartisan security personnel at the state tabulator that will see if there's any connections to the system coming from third-party domain names, domain numbers that aren't coming from the county boards of election. So there are some simple ways to stop this fraud.
Well, what amazes me is the suggestion that you hear when you talk about these things is, and which they're going to, just let Facebook do the counting. Facebook, the most criminal, corrupt organization that we know of now, that they're getting ready to throw dude Zuckerberg out because he's such a bad representative of his company. He knows nothing. He had nothing to do with creating it, as you know better than anyone else on the face of the earth. But what I'm saying here is election corruption is common throughout the world, and it is certainly an economic concern of the Queen and her Privy Council to make sure that they keep their control. And basically, it's economic terrorism to manipulate elections. Now, someone might say this is a complete conspiracy theory that you guys are talking about. No. Obama.
No. We need to go back to
$750,000 Obama spent to try to knock Netanyahu out of office. You have Victoria Nuland stating that she spent billions in two different overthrows of the duly elected president in Ukraine, twice, the Orange Revolution and the Euromaidan Revolution. And so she was very angry that anybody would get in the way of them putting their neo-Nazi Party of the Regions in place instead of a duly elected president. This happens all the time. George Soros has conducted over a dozen color revolutions, and most of them were only after he overthrew an election, a duly established and accepted election. Then they use Facebook, social media. They get ignorant people out on the street thinking that they're going to get something for nothing, or believing some ideological words that mean nothing to the people who actually stimulated them and paid for them and created the non-government organizations to put them out on the street. So these elections can be changed even after they have rigged the election. So if they don't get who they want by rigging it, then they go out on the street and they protest it. What we're pointing out, you're pointing out, because of your incredible research, is we can now name that in 17 states there was foreign influence because the very machines that were used, Smartmatic, were actually owned by Lord Malloch.
And George Soros.
Oh, that's right. And George
Soros and Lord Malloch are partners. Lord Malloch is a director of Open Society Foundation. He doesn't even hide it. It's on his UK Parliament profile. He's a member of the House of Lords now, in addition to being on the Privy Council, in addition to being a Sir, and in addition to being a Baron. He's gotten every title you can possibly think of. So clearly he's a go-to man for election rigging at the vote counting level.
And as a George Soros puppet, which he obviously is, he's really Soros's hand in the Privy Council and ear to the lips of Queen Elizabeth II.
Well, there are videos out there where he's defending Mr. Soros. So he doesn't even hide it. And neither does the Parliament. And it doesn't seem to bother the folks on the Privy Council as much as it appears to bother the British citizens who voted for Brexit.
He's a completely grotesque globalist, completely compromised, who is simply doing illegal work to manipulate elections for economic control in obeyance and in servitude to the Queen and the
and
court.
benefit. He holds investments and he's a director of a number of investment groups. Our researchers are still digging into all of those investments he has, but it's as extensive, it appears, as Sir Geoffrey Patty's are. So that's when the realization began to just drop that we're looking at the ultimate insider trading group. I mean, and I think what we see is the senior executive service and all of the creations of these public-private groups like OPIC and USAID and the Aerospace Corporation and MEC, Millennium Challenge, MCC, Millennium Challenge Corporation. All these corporations that ostensibly send money overseas are a part of this mechanism because our government bureaucrats probably are jealous of the power of this insider trading group in London called the Privy Council. Because who do they report to? The Queen. They don't have a constitution. And then the Queen's got a special court for them, so she makes sure that everybody gets taken care of as long as they pay the tribute. And that appears to be what's going on and has been going on for decades, if not centuries.
It just shocked me when you told me how many are on the Privy Council, because we had already named a dozen people who are principally evil doers in our own American elections, in the theft of our money from all those agencies and corporations you just mentioned, and out of their own self-aggrandizement and their own greed, they do get their share because they are the insider trading group that knows where to buy, when to buy, what to buy, because they've stolen the patents, they've rigged the elections, they've manipulated the markets, and now we find out that George Soros, the man who took down what they says took down the Bank of England, in other words, he manipulates currencies. Okay, what is happening in Venezuela right now? Fantastic currency manipulation. It costs $1 million to buy a cup of coffee, or 1 million bolivars to buy a cup of coffee. Why? That's what happens when you mess with George Soros and the globalists and try to,
You mentioned Venezuela. Here's an odd fact here. Smartmatic started in Venezuela.
Because it's a socialist,
Lord Malloch
communist,
brought it to
fascist
London.
group. That's a great place to start Nazi, fascist, communist, socialist corporations.
Right.
And so it's not surprising that you always find these evil people who are also, they come up with the venture capital for whatever is happening next. They are stirring up the problem so that they know what venture capital will be successful because they're creating the problem. It's just like Madison Avenue with a commercial. First, they have to create in you a need because you don't have the need of what they want to sell you. And they create that need. They make it look so good and then they sell it to you. Well, that's what is going on with the Privy Council. And also, members of the Privy Council are, of course, members of the Knights of Malta, the Vatican Insider Trading Group. But I like it that the Queen has 600 people to cushion her and protect her from any type of travail that might assault her trillions of dollars that she has in offshore accounts that she's ripped off from the 54 Commonwealth nations.
It's not 600.
It's not?
It's 597.
I know, you're an engineer. I told you I was going to round it off, but I knew it would ruffle your feathers. Yes, the
597.
The group of 600, and we're not being asked. You, me, and Betsy are not being asked to be the other three to make 600. Because you know what? I am not going to bow to the Queen. I'm not going to bow to the Pope. I'm not going to bow to anybody, and I'm certainly not going to believe that getting a title is going to make me cleansed of my sins as I stand next to the people who are guilty of literally manipulating elections where people die. This is no joke. In America, people didn't die, but certainly in other countries when they manipulate elections, people die, and these people don't care a thing about that.
Here's some more disturbing facts. Lord Malloch started a company called SGO Corporation to expand the Smartmatic influence. And one of the organizations that's quite involved with that operation is a law firm in the United States called DLA Piper. So what we've got is the typical banker, global law firm associations with the Privy Council, which is consistent with what we've seen now, that they were working on a one world corporatist takeover, and this was a key mechanism, and Lord Malloch has been leading it. I mean, if you go back into his resume, he was the chief of staff for the United Nations. Who's the leader of the United Nations? Kofi Annan. He was Kofi Annan's chief of staff, and was intimately involved with many aspects of our foreign policy in his roles at the UN. And then in early 1994, he was at the World Bank, which was just after Larry Summers left, and while they were destabilizing the Soviet Union and introducing the disastrous Russian voucher program that completely gave the new emerging Russian economy over to oligarchs. So he's been there for all the major events of the last 30, 40 years.
And what's really
helping drive
amazing, when you followed the rat lines of Sir Geoffrey Patty, they were so pervasive that I really didn't think, I mean, you have like the guy who controls the Bank of England, the guy who controls the Queen's Golden Shares, the guy who controls their mass deception, what they call, or their election manipulation. Then you have the guy who controls their commerce, the person who controls their intelligence, the one who controls their previously the military, the next person. All these people are on the Privy Council.
The Internet of Things.
The Internet of Things. These people have all the power in the entire United Kingdom, and they offer it at the feet of Queen Elizabeth. And then people think that she doesn't have any power. Remember when they took the vote the other day and they decided, yes, we are going to exit we're going to Brexit, we're going to exit the European Union, right? If the Queen agrees. So they had to go ask the Queen if she agreed with the vote. People forget, she is not tutelary. She is not a figurehead. She can veto anything. She can veto anything in military. She can veto anything in commerce, in economics, in the Bank of England, for war, who to bomb, who not to bomb. And it's very naive to now, after what we have revealed through our research, to think that there are not very ulterior motives going on here. And these ulterior motives go into stealing patents through Serco, a British company that stole your patent. And these are the insiders who got to buy into Facebook before it went public, and then went from being millionaires to billionaires in some cases. They know the inside track because they have the patents, and also Serco controls our military. And they also control a major part of our military intelligence, corporate intelligence, and military intelligence, and all of our data. So when it comes down to it, the Queen probably knows more about what we're doing than we do, and we don't even acknowledge that she has any influence. We just say that she's just a nice figurehead, and that isn't that
well,
sweet.
that's the best PR that money can buy, and they have been very successful. Let's admit it, they've been very successful for the years that we've been living in getting the public to believe that. And so what they've also learned is it's not hard to get the public to believe whatever you want. I learned this firsthand when we were after we had gotten our patent issued, and then we were looking at Facebook, and then they came out with that social network movie, which was a total lie, total fabrication, and yet the whole public to this day still quotes that movie as fact. So it's easy when you control the media to get most people to believe whatever you want because they're out there hardworking. They're not spending a lot of time listening to the news. They're creating value. They're creating wealth. And these people see those people, the hardworking people of the world, as idiots, as saps, as lowlifes, as deplorables, rather than seeing them as the real source of the creativity in the world. And that needs to change. We need to raise people's consciousness, raise the consciousness of the world to the point where we realize that the people who do the real work in this world are the ones who should have the power, and these people need to go spend time behind bars for all the sins that they've committed.
And they know it's sins because they're propaganda mechanisms. You had pointed out that one of these groups, I think it was Strategic Communications Laboratories in Africa, came up with two memes, two phrases that took down
South Africa.
It's like, what? They didn't even leave their offices in England, in London, and they take down nations because they have weaponized forms of media. And remember, every one of these dirty dogs has experience in PR, in propaganda, in news. That's what they are experts at because that's what the bankers need to control opinion. And as you say, it's very easy to control what people think if you have the right tools.
Because real people give other people, the benefit of the doubt and don't assume that everybody's lying to them. That's the way it is in Main Street. And so when you're at a natural disadvantage as a person when the other person knows that you're going to believe them until there's a reason not to believe you, and then that is the sphere within which these people operate. So they just keep ahead of the lying game and have this natural advantage. Well, we've got to change that dynamic. And we can still treat people according to the golden rule. But what we've got to do is protect ourselves from these snakes.
That's right. Because they're experts at spin, at putting out a neural network narrative, at perception management. They know exactly what they're doing. They even say it in their advertisement. This is mass deception. This is psychological manipulation. It's a psyops. And they're finding out more and more how deep it is and how pervasive it is. And people like Mark Zuckerberg don't even deny it anymore. They say, yes, yeah, we do that. Yeah. Oh, well, it's in the user agreement.
Right.
Yeah. So what we forget is that we are bombarded at all times by yellow journalism, propaganda, programming that is trying to make us believe a bunch of lies. We're in the age of falsehood politics. We are in the post-truth age, as they call it. And so it is completely incumbent upon the listener, upon the reader, upon the person looking at anything to have discernment, because if you do not, you will start to believe it. But here's how you usually can now know. 97% of Republicans believe that what they see on the news is a lie. 72% of everyone believes that what they see on the news is a lie. So basically, if you're seeing it on the news, reverse it, and that's probably closer to the truth.
Well, when I worked in the Soviet Union with dissidents and honest people there, they had a joke. They said they became experts at reading between the lines. And that's how bad it had gotten. So I've seen a society where that is the institution, where the lie is the truth, and that the irony is that their main newspaper, Pravda, means the truth, as most people know. And so what we have is a very similar situation here on a much bigger scale than the old Soviets were able to do. Now we have instantaneous messaging that goes around the planet, and these guys have taken advantage of it, and they have weaponized my technology, other people's technology, the capability of putting that news out. And I think we do have, as honest human beings, or people who try to be honest, we do have weapons against that, and that's called the truth. And the truth can dispel 10 lies very quickly. And the other aspect of it is stop listening to the words, see the actions. The words are lies. Look at the actions. You'll know them by their fruits, Jesus said. and many other honest people around the planet. So if somebody's not treating you like you would like to be treated, then assume they're lying.
I think also that we can have a demand a moratorium on the type of voting machines that we use and make it consistent.
Yes, they should be impounded tomorrow, all of them.
And we have to
you,
come up with
you,
a full
you have
system.
you have published the information that proves that these machines are the subject of foreign influence and therefore cannot be used in American elections. Period.
And then add to that,
it's not difficult.
right? And then add to that what you have been working on with your friends with that other group, your geniuses over there. We want a resolution passed in all states saying a bipartisan, absolutely foolproof chain of custody between every single exchange of that information until it gets, I don't care if it takes a week. I don't care if it takes 2 weeks. As long as when it gets there, we know that it's correct. And we also know that people didn't go and vote 12 times.
Yeah, all 50 states need to pass immediately a bipartisan chain of custody act. It's very simple, very direct, saying unless you can have a bipartisan group of people that take the votes from the voter and carry them all the way to the state, and you can verify that the number reported is what is being presented, then you've got a very clear, clean process for straightening up our vote.
And as Trump is using Mike Mulvaney to beat the heck out of useless agencies where there are thousands of people doing nothing, hopefully these kind of suggestions that you're making can actually make things more streamlined and can fit right into what is being done as a complete streamlining of the entire federal agencies. Because
no, one federal dime is needed for this. This is a states issue.
Ah.
The states are the ones responsible for votes, not the federal government. So this whole idea that we got to depend upon some unseen third party flying in from Washington to protect our interests is wrong. We, the citizens, have to take charge of this process.
I agree, and also, but remember, I don't know if it's still true, Obama put Homeland Security in charge of the last election, a federal agency, and they ran it through the U.S. Digital Service, which was basically the man in the middle to make sure that they manipulated, but it was a landslide, so they couldn't manipulate it. And that's the amazing thing, that it was so miraculous that it even beat a corrupt system, because we know the system was corrupt because we saw it between Hillary and Bernie. But Bernie never once contested the 17 times that there was overt election fraud. So we need to now stand up and say that we really want our rights, and our rights are to know that our vote counts and that it isn't just being mixed together with a bunch of people who aren't supposed to be voting, as well as being manipulated in all these fashions that you've described.
Well, it's just mind-boggling that we've let our voting system become so corrupted, and it's taken decades for these people to get to where we are now, and they are close, or we're close. Hopefully, we're going to set this right to a full takeover. And the other disturbing aspect of this is that the person in every state in charge of watching over the election is the Secretary of State in each state. And what we've got to do is take a close look at who decided to buy these machines, because I think we're going to see a very telling list of people that who bought these corrupt machines and are now defending these machines against people who are saying, "Hey, how do we count these votes? How do we verify that the people's vote is actually being reflected in this printout?"
That is an excellent
Most people
point.
who work in election polling areas don't know technology, so they're not going to assume that the printout is incorrect. So they're not the ones to manage this. This has got to be done very carefully. Get it back to paper ballots where everybody can see the vote and can count it together. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, whoever's running. And it's bipartisan. How can anyone who's a real American argue with a bipartisan verification?
And then we need to make sure to continue to move against Google, against Facebook and other social media for manipulating through algorithms and through false media, through stupid things that they posted that were in fact out of the Global Engagement Center and were being ran by Brits through the Strategic Communications Laboratory, who had a $76 million contract during the 2016 presidential election. And all that stuff that they show you was the Russian stuff that was being posted. That was actually posted by Brits intervening and using our own Department of Defense because of Obama allowing propaganda to be legal to be used against Americans in his National Defense Authorization Act. The Board of Broadcasting Governors and the Global Engagement Center warred against Americans and warred against, weaponized these things and warred against Trump followers and tried to support
Well,
Hillary.
you know, one of the things I think that it's hard for most people to understand is how easy it is to manipulate people through things like memes. And when you're referring to these Board of Broadcasting Governors, you're not talking about something that's complicated or sophisticated. You're talking about very simple messages, right? You're talking about phrases, in fact. And I remember during the presidential election how that one ad kept recurring where there were people who were claiming that somehow President Trump was hurting the children. And what we then later learned is that that was a completely fabricated circumstance, and the person who was shown to be hurting was not actually hurting and was just an actor. And that's how simple these things can be.
Oh, yes. False
and
flags
if it works, they just keep playing it over and over again because a certain target audience will be affected by it.
Yes, and then the truth is so obfuscated that you can never find it. How about this one? This is very, very, very nice. That Obama's director of ICE has been caught and charged with taking 3 names from the ICE database, giving them Social Security numbers, and making those 3 his dependents on his taxes, and basically gleaning $190,000 in not paying taxes. And so he's actually been charged with it. So here we have, that's what Obama's ICE director was doing. What all these fake, what they encourage everyone to do, come over, claim that's my child, get in, don't show up for your trial, get a Social Security number, and then act like you're an American and pay your taxes, receive taxes, and then sue the government later because you've been paying taxes and you have tax returns. That's what some of the DACA are doing. So this is the kind of confused world we live in. It's the opposite. It's turned upside down, inside out, and backwards. And you have
people who think the people who think of this stuff are not creative people. They're manipulators. They're not creating the wealth in this country. They're eating the wealth. They're consuming the wealth. And we've allowed these people to be put in charge. And that's our fault.
Yes, and Lord Malloch, who works for the evil emperor George Soros, basically, remember, he gave $18 billion to his non-governmental organizations in America of money he stole. He paid no taxes on that money from his quantum group. And what happens with that? It's all election-oriented. It's all get out on the street. The very thing that just happened with Linda Sarsour, that's being paid for by George Soros. So people, I think they're beginning to wake up. But the point is, elections are important. Voting is important. We cannot overemphasize that. That's why so many of the Queen's Privy Council members make money off of manipulating elections, both by the machines and by selling services to manipulate people. So what we're saying is this is the time that as we go deeper to find out really how far does the Queen's influence go, we now know and have proof that it goes right into the American election.
Yes, very deep. It's now very clear that these people have developed a very sophisticated way in cooperation with the SES to take the reins of power in the U.S. And we let them do it because we sort of are jealous of this Privy Council insider group that lives on forever. I mean, once they're on that Privy Council, they don't leave it until they die.
Wow, that
Why
sounds
would they?
Just like the senior executive service, but there's 10,000 of them. only 600 in the Privy Council, but she's probably got 10,000 servants in the most
Well, if
organized
you
group.
add the Crown agents, sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
Add the
yes.
Crown agents, and you've got your 10,000.
There you go. So she's got her 10,000, and SES is basically a fake civil service of a bunch of elitists who believe they should be paid more than all the civil servants. Work 30 years. Doesn't matter. I should be paid more than you because I'm a senior executive service member, and you can't fire me, and you can't take away my benefits, and I really don't do any work. Well, isn't that exactly like the royalty of England? Isn't that the elite? Isn't that like the members of parliament, the Lord Honorable Sir Baron Whoosy Whoos? Well, who are those people?
Like judges.
They're horrible people when you look into who they actually are. We won't go into that. But let's just say those old, ancient institutions, they tried to be transferred here to America. And because of you and your good research and your friends and all their research, they're being busted. So let's go into this deeper next time. But we want to thank you for coming out of the mines and sharing this with us and revealing that Lord Malloch is working for the evil emperor, George Soros. That explains so many things. Get rid of Smartmatic voting machines and make sure we have a chain of custody that is foolproof. These are wonderful ideas you've come up to antidote the evil that you also found down there in the mines, Michael. So thank you so much for all your efforts.
Maybe you have a new character for your Star Wars trilogy, Lord Malloch.
Absolutely. He's a Vader. He's some kind of Sith Lord. There's no doubt about it. Thanks again, Michael. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.